Welcome back, everyone, to this week's episode of Talk Exchange. Today's guest is Rhonda Kuykendall, who spoke at the 2024 National Convention. She has a truly unbelievable story with fighting human trafficking and her own personal story with being trafficked as a young child. It's a very inspiring episode. It's an episode that I think everyone should listen to so that we can learn the signs and look for things that may present themselves in everyday society. She talks about how victims are essentially given a life sentence, some of the worst myths that go around with regards to human trafficking, and how a lot of it is really more of a mental situation. So it's just a really good episode. I hope you learn a lot from today's show, and we'll see you again next week.
Welcome to Talk Exchange. I'm Tracy Edwards, CEO of the National Exchange Club.
And I'm Christy Lindahl, Director of Communications. How are you, Tracy?
Great. How are you doing
I'm
today,
doing
Christy?
good. We're marching toward April.
We are.
No pun intended. And April for a lot of us is National Prevention of Child Abuse Month.
Yes.
Something that Exchange and our members across the country embrace fully. We spend the month, recognizing the efforts of some of our Exchange Club Center for the Prevention of Child Abuse, those directors and staff. We certainly talk about some of the new materials that we have available. And of course, we like to bring awareness to other people who are working in the field to help us accomplish that mission.
Yes, and to that end, we wanted to bring in our speaker from the National Convention who was so powerful with her personal story.
Yes.
And we thought, wow, this is something that we want to just share via this platform. So we're pleased to have with us today Rhonda Kuykendall. Welcome, Rhonda.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here.
We're excited to see you again. We had the honor of having you present at our national convention. You shared your story at that point. So we are hoping for the benefit of our audience here today on this platform, you would share your story and then maybe catch us up a little today with what you've made happen since. I know you've been very busy working to get your efforts out and draw attention to this situation. So why don't you start with your story?
Sure. So we hear a lot about sex trafficking in the news, but one of the things that we don't talk a whole lot about is familial sex trafficking. And so familial sex trafficking is when a family member is involved or either like a caregiver is involved. And in my case, it was my parents. My parents were paid by my trafficker. I met a trafficker when I was 10 years old at my father's apartment complex. And after a very short conversation, I began taking trips with him. I live in Fort Bend County in Texas, and so I was taken into Houston, which is a huge major hub. Eventually, I was flown. I was flown out on Fridays, returned on Sundays, and sitting in my seat at my elementary school on Monday morning. And it took a very long time to come forward, to be strong enough. I was actually in my mid-30s, and when I did come forward, back then we weren't even talking about trafficking. When I did come forward, I found out I was past what was called a statute of limitations. And so what that means is that prosecutors have a certain amount of time to file charges. And if you're past a certain amount of time, you're too late. And I was 6 years too late. And so I remember just thinking about the injustice of, the very people that are supposed to put on this planet to help us, who is law enforcement and prosecutors, are just telling me there's nothing that they could do. And I just remember thinking, like, this cannot happen to somebody else. And so I bought a Lobbying 101 book, read it cover to cover. I will tell you that government was not my strong suit in high school, but I bought this lobbying book and I marched into Austin very naively. And so it took me about 4 years over 2 legislative sessions to abolish the statute of limitations. Back then, it was child sexual assault because we were not talking about trafficking way back then. And so that's what kind of started my love, my passion for legislative advocacy. I just got back from DC. So January is National Human Trafficking Prevention Month. And so we do a whole lot of work in January. I got back from DC where I was there with NICOSI and the Institute of Shelter Care and Human Trafficking Legal Center, all of these great minds across the entire country that was created by Allies Against Slavery. That's a nonprofit here in Texas. And the goal is to create a national data ecosystem that's going to bring awareness to research, evidence-based research as to what trafficking really looks like. And not only sex trafficking, because we hear a lot about that, but also labor trafficking and male victimization. Looking at those marginalized communities that are so underrepresented, and also they are disproportionately affected by trafficking. And so I was really excited to get back from DC. I've also done several presentations with the First Lady of Texas about human trafficking in airports. How do we get airport staff and employees trained to be able to identify it? And it used to be where we would say, see something, say something, and like train people that are going to the airport. But what do we know about the airport? It's extremely transient. You may look at something that doesn't look right, turn around, and when you turn back around, they're gone. And so there has to be this impetus, this desire for the staff members at the airport, whether they're law enforcement, TSA, or flight attendants, to be able to really recognize some of those signs of what trafficking could look like. And so I just got a new job. I am now the Human Trafficking Task Force Coordinator for the Fort Bend County District Attorney's Office. And the goal here in Fort Bend County is we got a grant from the Office from Victims of Crime to create a brand new task force. And there is something beautiful about living and working in the very community where I was harmed to try to put in place a task force that's going to help other people that come after me.
Wow, that's amazing. Congratulations on your new position. I know you'll have great impact based on just your passion for the very situation that you are part of and putting a stop to that. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take us back, though, if you don't mind, to 10-year-old Rhonda. I'm just thinking at that point, you had no idea what was going on and maybe not even realizing that this was wrong and you shouldn't be doing this. At what point did you know that, this just doesn't feel right? I'm involved in something that I shouldn't be, that maybe I need an adult's help. How did that look at that point?
I definitely didn't understand it was trafficking.
Right.
And that's actually not very uncommon,
Right.
right? I understood that there was sexual abuse at a very young age, which also makes people more susceptible to being trafficked. Traffickers look for vulnerabilities, and one of those
Right.
vulnerabilities is previous sexual abuse. And so that definitely makes you more vulnerable. And so throughout my childhood, I had been sexually assaulted by so many people in my life that the one thing I remember thinking of when I was younger was that all of these men that had sexually assaulted me, they didn't know each other. And so I was the common denominator. And so I always felt like I was the one to blame and I was at fault. And it really came to a head the year was about 2002, 2003. I was grocery shopping and I came in contact with a man that had sexually assaulted me. He was just grocery shopping. And I, without thinking, walked right up to him. And I asked him if his name was who he was. And he said yes. And all I said was, "Do you remember me? I'm Janine's daughter." I didn't give him my name. I didn't give him my married name, but I just said that. And as soon as I said that, his face kind of went white. And he said, "Oh no, you're getting me confused with my brother." And he turned around and he went to go leave the grocery store. I just remember thinking I had to get out of this grocery store before he did, and I didn't. And so I found myself at the front of the grocery store paralyzed. I couldn't walk out because I didn't know where he was. I didn't know how to scan for safety, and that had been a habit of mine to constantly look around, just hyper vigilant to make sure I was safe. But then that other emotion that I had was anger. I was angry because I had spent so much time trying to get over this, and here I was paralyzed again. About a week later, I got a call from my mother, and she told me that she was not going to be at work. She had to go to a funeral. And I said, "Who died?" And she said the name of this man that I confronted, that he committed suicide 1 week after I confronted him in the grocery store. And I told my mom exactly what I just shared with y'all, and it took her just a couple of seconds before she said, "It had nothing to do with you. His wife left him and he didn't have a job." She said, "I know his family, and so I'm going to go to the funeral in support of his family." And my mom went to his funeral. That, probably coupled with the realization that I had 2 young children at the time, and that I know what I would do to protect my kids, began having nightmares and dreams about what I've always said was the worst of the worst, which was my trafficker, and that I had never gone to the police to report him. And so that led me down this journey of going to the police, reporting the crime, finding him in prison. When I went to the police for the first time, he had been convicted 4 times in 3 different states,
Wow.
all sex trafficking related charges. It was in Texas, Kansas, California, and back in Texas again. And so that's really kind of what started me. Although he was in prison, I found out he was going to be released within the year. He was going to be released through a parole hearing. It was mandatory parole. And now, today, I'm 54 years old. And as early as 1 year ago, I had to travel to El Paso for another parole revocation hearing for him because he had created several parole violations, and his parole was revoked again, and he was sent back to prison again as early as October of last year. And so what I really want people to understand, especially when you're dealing with polyvictimization related to human trafficking, that so many times victims of this crime were given a life sentence. We may not be given a prison sentence, but we're given a sentence of, if we are blessed to be healthy enough, which I am, I have a huge support system, then we have got to deal with this for the rest of our lives.
Right.
We have to deal with the justice system. We have to deal with our perpetrator, and the trauma and the triggers of what comes along with it. Even when I traveled to El Paso, when I got back home, I just remember thinking like, wow, my brain is telling me how I should feel, but my body wasn't responding. And so it took me just a few days to recalibrate. And then I was given an opportunity by Crime Stoppers of Houston to do what was called a parole video. So he will be coming out of prison again. He's not up for parole for another 5 years, so I do have a little bit of time. But I was able to do this parole video to where when he comes up for parole again, they will send the video to the parole board, so I don't have to travel there. I don't have to see him. I don't have to talk about it. We don't really talk a whole lot about what is the effect of parole hearings on victims. You know, today you will see victims of all types of different crimes, not just trafficking, all types of sexual assaults, domestic violence. We are in professional spaces as law enforcement, executive directors, therapists, you know, and then you get this phone call, and the phone call is, oh, he's coming up for parole. And now you have to go talk to somebody who is a complete stranger, and you have to prove to them that you are damaged enough to keep your perpetrator in prison. So it's a chronic thing of always making victims look to your past rather than to your future. And, you know, I also, this whole thing happening with the parole video was such a blessing to me, but I could afford to travel, to get an airplane, you know, to have a rental car in a hotel. For so many victims of crime, they can't. So these parole videos, it needs to be something that we see coming like across the United States, not just here in Texas. And I was the first live victim here in the Houston area that was able to do one of these videos. Previous to me, they were always videos from family members whose loved ones had been murdered.
Well,
important work.
Your strength is amazing and admirable, to say the least. And, you know, you brought up a good point. To you and many of the victims go on to have careers in these fields, but I'm thinking about the people who don't have that strength or that support system, and they suffer just a lifetime of trauma. And I cannot imagine living that way. To your credit, you're doing something about it, and you've made some amazing things happen in your new career. What do you see happening? What do you see as the impact? What are some of your initiatives that you're trying to make happen to prevent this from happening to somebody else?
Well, when I worked on that first bill, it went into effect in 2007. So that's quite a few years ago.
Yes.
And so it definitely gave me this passion for legislative advocacy, and I'm always going to be working within the Texas legislature. Here in Texas, we meet every other year for 5 months, so it really is fast and furious. And so that's where I have seen a huge impact. This task force is also going to be able to have an impact, because we see, although we know with the advent of social media and technology, right, traffickers groom people maybe differently, whereas my trafficker had to meet me face to face. So much of it happens online. And although that's true, the methodology that they use is still disturbingly similar, meaning they look for kids that come from hard places, kids that have more vulnerabilities than other kids. And yes, anybody can be trafficked because everybody has vulnerabilities. But we have to be able to speak in those spaces and look to, the at-risk, marginalized communities. And that is the beauty of exchange, because that is one of their priorities. I did not realize the relationships that I had with exchange until I was a lot older. When I first started working on changing the law way back in 2003, I was told go to exchange, and that's what I
Nice.
did.
Yeah.
I've got, I don't have any videos, but I have pictures of me standing up,
Mm-hmm.
giving presentations, saying, please support me, help me go to Austin and change this law. And so both legislative sessions, it was 2005 and 2007, it was exchange helping me go and do that. And so here
Awesome.
locally in Fort Bend County, we have probably 6 or 7 exchange clubs. And what's interesting is the district attorney that I worked with back in 2005, he's a member of exchange, John Healy. He was in my presentation when I talked at
Yes.
nationals. And my new boss with the Fort Bend County District Attorney's Office, I work there today. And my DA now, Brian Middleton, is also a huge exchange member. And so we have the leaders in our communities that are all part of exchange that have made it the focus to combat human trafficking. And although our task force has created for Fort Bend County, it will have an impact in the greater Houston area because many victims are groomed in Fort Bend County and then taken into Houston.
Wow. What can the average person do? If I know the adage is if you see something, say something, but people tend not to do that, or they tend to misinterpret or just overlook.
Second guess what they think they're seeing.
Have you seen a change in that over time now that we're in 2025 as opposed to when you started your advocacy? Have you seen, are people more forthcoming, willing to help? What does that look like? And what should people do?
Well, what you said is very accurate. If you're out in the community and there's something that doesn't look right, so many times what we tell people to do is to look for a cluster or several red flags, not just one, right? Because what you're going to find is you're immediately going to think, wow, what am I missing? Or I don't have the full story, or what if I'm wrong? There are always this second guessing what you're seeing. And so while we have seen this, see something, say something, overwhelmingly, you hear that all the time. I have been committed within probably the last year to 2 years to look at what are the industries that intersect with trafficking, educate them, because it is really hard for community members that go to a tattoo parlor to know if the person sitting next to them is actually being trafficked or not. And so what we want to do is look for any industry that intersects with trafficking and educate them as employees and professionals. And what you don't think about is places like AT&T, places that go into people's homes that are going to see something that other people don't. And so, yes, we know hotels, motels, hair, nail, tattoo parlors, but financial industries as well, banks, cash apps, all of those, and then social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram. TikTok has been huge for navigating and watching how trafficking is occurring on TikTok as well. And so if we could educate those industries to be on the front lines, the front defense, airports are the same way. Get them on the front defense. That is the better way to do it. And then we always try to tell our community members, deep dive into what the data is telling us. Because while social media, it increases the access to trafficking, it also is horrific at spreading a lot of falsehoods and myths. And we've all seen it. We've all seen people make posts about how they're being targeted for trafficking in a Target, for example, or at a playground, or these zip ties on cars that somehow. And so many people do this to create their own platform to go viral, when in reality, if you don't vet it with law enforcement, it's really not happening. One of the very, very worst myths that I've seen on TikTok in particular, it showed a woman that was in an airport and she was giving some hand sign. I don't even remember what the hand sign was, but she was flashing this hand sign. And this was a hand sign for people in the airport to look and say, oh my goodness, she's being trafficked. When in the reality of trafficking is that we as victims do not self-identify. We don't see ourselves as a victim of a crime because we blame ourselves for everything that's happening. So to say that this is some woman that has been abducted and that she's flashing a sign for everybody to come and save her, it doesn't work that way. Instead of being this physical abduction of the body, which everybody is always talking about abductions, it is more of a mental abduction of the mind where you are groomed to believe that this person is going to take care of you and they care for you. This whole thing about, strangers in white vans with dark windows, that is not the reality of what we see out there in the streets going on with human trafficking. That victim will spend some time communicating with a trafficker and willingly walk out to their vehicle, not understanding the magnitude of what's about to happen to them.
Wow.
That's very disconcerting.
It is.
At the least.
It's a sobering reality for sure. But we've heard that theme, Rhonda. We have other guests this month that are talking about, child abuse situations and child sexual abuse, and they all have kind of the same running theme as well about who the victims are and
How they're silenced.
Yes. Wow. Well, thank God you're in the line of work you are to help people and to be able to identify these situations.
Yeah, and people like you who rise up out of society. I mean, you're what really saves society.
Yes.
From these horrible people
Absolutely.
that could take control. On behalf of the children you've helped, thank you.
Absolutely. And now you mentioned your partnership with Exchange Clubs. That's how I met you when I was in Fort Bend a few years ago. And it was a delight to meet you and to learn your story. And I love the support that you have via Exchange and your family and friends there. How did you get involved with the Exchange Club? Tell our listeners about how that came to pass that you became involved initially.
Well, the Exchange Club helped me way back then. But even then, I didn't have a relationship with them. I literally went there, spoke, and they helped support me.
Right.
It was many years later where I was asked to be on the board of directors of a local nonprofit here. It's called Child Advocates of Fort Bend. And whenever I sat down on the onboarding meeting, there was this old guy, and it's okay for me to say,
Right.
he's like a dad to me.
Yeah.
There was this old guy in a hat sitting next to me. And he's probably one of the longest members of the Exchange Club of Sugarland here locally. David Lanigan is his name. And David and we came onto the board together, and I just remember thinking, I am so unqualified for this position, because it was Dr. David Lanigan. And I remember when I first got an award for the legislative work that I did with Child Advocates of Fort Bend, as I looked out in the audience of people, it was David that was standing there, and I could read his mouth, and he was wording to me, "I'm so proud of you."
Aww.
And that was how I got back connected into Exchange Club. My husband was the first president of an Exchange Club that we started here locally, closer to where we live. And so we have met some amazing friends through Exchange.
Definitely. And I'm so glad you're part of it. You and your husband, Tommy, have been both so valuable to Exchange and really helped move this movement forward as well as others. So thank you for sharing your powerful story. To anybody listening, what can they do? How do you suggest that they get behind this effort? What can they do to help?
The best way that you can help is look for vetted, good, nonprofit human trafficking organizations in your area. Yes, they do need finances, right?
Right.
Funding is always vital. But they also need people that are going to look at the realities of how trafficking is happening in each individual geographic location, because it can be different depending upon where you are. And once you understand trafficking, to go back and share that with your family, your friends, your neighborhoods, your communities, speaking truth into spaces about what's going on with trafficking, rather than grabbing onto this sensationalistic view that probably affects less than 0.5 percent of the population, but focusing in really on how it happens in your individual communities. Be prepared that when you do see something, I always talk about, like, it's this innate, the hair on the back of your neck stands up, your gut hurts, something doesn't look right. Go ahead and report it. And the way that you report it is never confront them. You could get hurt, or that victim could get hurt. But try to find some identifying factor, whether that is a license plate or a hotel room number, something that you can give to police. And when you do report it, give them the reasons why. Give them more information. Like, we've heard instances where the police are called and said, hey, there's a couple that looks like it's something really bad on the corner of, two streets that meet. There's nothing they can do with that information. We have to be able to give them identifying information, and really commit to just stay educated in the space and what's going on.
Excellent advice.
Definitely. Well, I know you have inspired our online community to get behind and do something. That's what exchange clubs in particular are good at. So we appreciate you joining us today. We appreciate your involvement in exchange and sharing your story. And we're excited about the work you're going to continue to do. Please stay in touch and keep us updated on what you're making happen out there.
Will do. Thank you.
Thanks to our guest today, Rhonda Kuykendall. To learn more how to get involved with the Exchange Club nearest you, please visit nationalexchangeclub.org. And thanks for tuning into this episode of Talk Exchange. Rhonda, thank you.
Yes.
Again, wow.
Your story blows me away every time.
Yeah, I know.